Do do do, theme song. Do do do, I'm broke so this is my theme song. Do do do, just imagine this is an awesome theme song. Do do, theme song. Hello, welcome to Left of the Box. Bonjour, bienvenue. I'm Sandy. Today I had a fantastic conversation with the one and only Dan from the internet. I have been a fan of his for a long time, so I was thrilled when he accepted my invitation to come on my show. We talked about a lot of issues that we are both dealing with on our own sides of the border and how it relates to us and how it relates to each other. And I gotta say, I was really nervous about talking to him because I am a bit of a fan, non-binary I'm not fanboy, not fan girl, however that works. But when we got talking, all of those nerves went away and I was able to relax. And like I said, we had a fantastic conversation. So please watch, enjoy, share the video, subscribe to both of our channels. Links will be in the description box below. Follow both of us on Twitter if you haven't already. And please just help continue to get the message out there about progressive movement and where we'd like to go, and hopefully a better world is possible. And with the support of people like you, I believe someday we'll get there. Without further delay, please enjoy the video. Hello, welcome everyone. I am Sandy from Left of the Box, and today I have with me a very special guest that I'm super excited to talk with, Dan from the internet. Hi, Dan.
Hello, happy to be with you.
For people who might not be aware of who you are, would you mind giving a little bit of background?
Sure. I'm Dan. I'm a video producer, online leftist of note. I previously worked at TYT for about 5, 7 years or so, from being an intern working on their business side of things and then working on the production side. I helped start the Damage Report with John Idarola. I've produced for the main Young Turks show and a couple of other different offshoot and spinoffs. And I last did special coverage before I kind of switched and did private sector work, but I still do online sort of things and videos because it's something I'm still passionate about, and I like the sort of burgeoning sort of leftist creator space. It's really nice to have this environment and to be a part of it from this vantage point that I'm at. Yeah, that's a little bit about me. You can find me on Twitter at Dan from the Web and on YouTube at youtube.com/Dan from the Internet. I host a show called Power Report that I'm trying to do more frequently, but it's basically focusing on the news of the America and the world through a perspective of leftists and people of color and class, because you can put them all together, even though a lot of people don't believe that. But no, I'm happy to have you on. I'm happy to, sorry, I'm so used to hosting shows, happy to be a guest on your show. I love being a guest because it's a lot less work. But
Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. I'm feeling it right now because I'm still new to all this. So the pressure's on, oh my God, I have to have the points ready. And I've done so much research for stuff that 90% of which we're not going to talk about probably because we just won't get to it.
I
Hmm?
I am happy to get to whatever you think we can cram in. Let's just run through it, and I'm happy to do so. Because I've also, being a producer, I know what it feels like to let research go to waste, and some always does in a show. It's just inevitable, especially if you're doing your job right. But let's go. Let's do what we can.
Okay. So first of all, I just kind of want to go over why I feel this sort of talk is so important between us neighboring countries, Canada and the United States. The average Canadian, and this is why we would come across as smug a lot of the times, I think, is the average Canadian knows a lot more about the average, American, what's happening in there, versus what the average American knows about what's going on in Canada. My biggest frustration is the average Canadian knows more about what's going on in America than they know what's going on in Canada as well. So I just kind of want to build a little bit more cross-border solidarity because we're fighting all the same issues. Everything you're fighting for, $15 minimum wage, better health care, environment issues, corruption in politics, it's all the same. And I find it very difficult for either one of us to get more progressive policies put in place, push our politicians if we're not doing it at the same time. Because our Liberal Party is as corporate as they come. And there's a lot of things that happen kind of behind the scenes that Americans aren't aware about. Because again, we're about 10% of your population, so it seems like such a small detail. But we're each other's number one trading partner. We're both in the G7. And every overseas conflict you guys do, we support. Whenever there's a coup around the world, our government kind of waits for you to announce who's the leader so that we know what to say. And so we kind of help prop up American policies. And so unless we're kind of both calling it out at the same time, it's hard because one will anchor down the other. And that's why I feel it's so important to have these talks so that people become more aware of these issues. And so
Yeah, I definitely agree.
And so I just kind of want to get a feel as to what you actually know about Canada, like, because it's easy for me to say, okay, we know this and this and this, but so it's kind of like a game, but not really, and there's no wrong answers. Just like, what are your impressions of Canada?
Yeah, I definitely say my impressions of Canada have evolved as my sort of awakening as a leftist, especially as a leftist with an international focus, has evolved. Because in the United States, it is an issue across the board getting people who are and are not extremely online, who are into and not into politics, to care about international issues. Like, it doesn't matter if you have like a more valence to these things, even on a political level. You can get people into national politics often more than you can get people in the state and local politics. But sometimes you can get people in the state and local politics. International just seems so far, and Americans have fed this we're number one kind of mentality. So it's like this afterthought thing, except for people who are wealthier and more elite, who get to travel to these countries and get sort of that American tunnel vision perspective of them. That being said, I have traveled to Canada once and have that American tunnel vision perspective, I guess, in that case. But no, I definitely, when it comes to the history, I understand there are parallels in the founding of the United States and Canada, at least in the both the reality of the history and the sort of propaganda that was sort of pardon me, use of the term whitewashing of like a lot of what was happening with I believe we're at Native Americans currently in the United States, but Canada uses the term First Nations, I believe. But the people who were here originally
Mhm.
had had more of like a they had more of a claim here, and they were effectively like through mass continuous genocides wiped out of this country. In America, it was called manifest destiny, and we were taught about all those things as like it was a political but also like a moral decision to make sure that we had our own, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, so to speak, kind of way of viewing colonial expansion, or like Western expansion. We didn't call it colonial expansion, it was just states, more states being founded. But there were Mexican territories here, there were French territories here. And so I understand in a very vague sense that like a lot of that was playing on in Canada's history as well. And then there's been, I'll be honest, basically a blur between the American Revolution and something like the French Canadian War kind of things to modern times, because we focus on America and we barely do a good job at that. Well, more on that later. But I can definitely see, especially in the modern day, that it's absolutely apparent that Canada loves to live. I think especially because, like, both figuratively and literally above the United States in a lot of moral contexts, especially after Donald Trump. They like to say that, you know, we have a friendly sort of face and a posture, and we try to be forgiving and welcoming of all people. And there have been a lot of liberal and even occasionally conservative politicians in Canada who've been able to pull that facade for such a long time that it's almost like a believed ethos. But time after time, I think COVID-19 shone a light on this, but this has been happening beforehand in Canada, to my limited knowledge. Effects of racism and classism that were born from Canada in the beginning, when it became like sort of like a settler project of England and France, to today, as being still having those effects and those roots and those issues. And so there are some parallels there between the US and Canada, but I think there are also some differences as well.
Yeah. So in Canada, it's Indigenous peoples because there's the First Nations, and that's always pluralized because there's many, many different tribes across the country that have zero in common when it comes to their culture, their language, their costuming. There's also Métis and Inuit. So they're all part of the Indigenous peoples. And in Canada, we tend to refer to it as maple washing right now. Like we've done plenty of whitewashing, but currently the biggest issue is the maple washing, where we come across as this friendly, progressive, opening, welcoming, almost socialist country when none of that is true. None of it. And it's so frustrating, especially when I see Americans talk about Canada and they say something, and I'm just screaming because that's not our reality here. And unfortunately, there is a lot of class issues in Canada. And so there's a lot of people in Canada who don't even know how bad it is. If you have a decent income and are white, you think Canada is great. But any other group of people, we kind of see through the facade. So I just kind of, again, want to get a gauge of where your knowledge lies. So something that Canadians would typically know about America, hands down, who your past two presidents were. So you have Joe Biden right now, Donald Trump, Obama. Do you know who our current prime minister is?
I know it's currently Justin Trudeau, and I used to keep up with it in the past, but I can't tell you that I know the past two Canadian prime ministers.
Most Canadians could probably name Stephen Harper, but they would not know who was before that. They would forget. There's 52 states in the United States. Do you have how many provinces there are and territories?
Um, Give me some time to, like a child, name as many as I can. So you've got British Columbia, Alberta, Quebec. Yukon is one of them, right? Or maybe not.
It's a
I'm not, you're not
territory.
going to tell me. There's Canadian Northwest Territory. Yeah. Canadian Northwest Territories. Isn't that like a name of one of them too?
Yeah, Northwest
Like the one that's
Territories.
super far north? Yeah. Um, is Nova Scotia one, or is that
Yeah,
just like a place?
it's
Um,
both.
okay, cool. Um, and Montreal is a place within Quebec, which is the province. And I know I'm missing one other one that's like Newfoundland or something like that, but have I gotten a couple?
Close. You're also, I'm in Ontario.
Got you.
10
Ontario,
yeah, 10
yeah.
provinces, 3 territories.
So there's a difference.
Yes, provinces are run, we have premiers of our provinces. The territories fall under federal jurisdiction, so they don't have a premier. They don't have, here we have provincial representatives that in Ontario we call members of provincial parliament. And then there's the federal level, which is a member of parliament. So MPs. Whereas in the territories, it's just MPs. They don't have it down lower. And so
Yeah.
there are healthcare, there are a lot of other things that I get in Ontario, they get a different system of, in a way. It's confusing.
But that actually sounds a lot like Washington D.C., Puerto
Mhm.
Rico. We have like I wouldn't expect even Americans to get these, like the U.S. Midway Islands. There's
Mhm.
Guam. There's all
Yeah.
these other like random remnants of World War I and World War II that Americans have bases there, and therefore
Mhm.
we have schools and McDonald's and other
Yeah.
infrastructure that are there as well, and these people vote.
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
very similar second tier system.
Yeah. Because they, in the territories they vote, they have representatives, just not on smaller levels. So it can be confusing, and it's confusing for a lot of people how our parliamentary system actually works. Most Canadians don't know, again, that you don't actually vote for the prime minister here. You
I'm
vote.
aware of parliamentary systems at
Mhm.
least because
Mhm.
I have some experience with England and like paying
Mhm.
attention to Europe. And so, if to an extent that it's like those broader parliamentary systems where you're voting for parties and then those parties elect
Mhm.
leaders and then that leader through negotiation of like coalition governments and things like that become prime minister.
Yeah.
Assuming it's like roughly similar to that in Canada.
Yeah, right now we have a minority liberal lead. So what that means is that The Liberals don't have enough votes on themselves to pass anything they want. They have to team up with at least the Conservatives, the NDP, or the Bloc Québécois. And what's really kind of eye-opening to a lot of people who pay attention to Canadian politics is how often the Liberals vote and team up with the Conservatives when it comes to things like taxation or denying us pharmacare, because our healthcare is not universal. So none of our prescriptions are covered. And recently the NDP put forward a motion to have that become universal. And Liberals, Conservatives voted it down. And so when you start seeing the parallels between how those two parties actually vote together, it really does become apparent that our Liberal Party is not a left party. It's right of center. And Justin Trudeau is just very good at making it look good, making it look progressive when it's not. And it's so frustrating because there's so many people that are just in their bubbles here. And part of it is there's so much paying attention to what's happening in the States, because all of our media, our news, it comes from the States. That's one of the things I always find hilarious when I see Canadians down on American programs. It's like, oh, what's it like in Canada? And it's like, it's the same. It's the same. We get all the same stuff. And the way American...
Your sports networks are literally rebranded American sports networks. They literally have the American logos, but they slap the Canadian logos on top of them as if you can't see what's underneath. It's kind of wild to me.
Yeah, it's more than that, because a lot of us will have friends, family, colleagues in the States. And so the influences that the States have on us is extreme. And one of the things I've been yelling on Twitter recently is when I see all these Canadians like, oh, did you just see the Americans? They voted down the $15 minimum wage. Ah, that's horrible. And I'm like, we don't have a $15 minimum wage. Why aren't we like, we don't have it. And there was a movement for $15 minimum wages, and that's not even the same because of the dollar. You know, it's only like $12 American that we're fighting for. So it's...
Yeah.
And then just the absolute extent of the whitewashing that happened here is so bizarre. And the reason why I got into politics in the first place was because I was paying attention to what was happening in the States with the election of Trump. And then it finally clued into me, why do I know more about what's happening there than I do here? Because I knew it was only a matter of time. If you guys elected Trump, it's only going to be a matter of time before we get that here, because we always follow suit to what's happening down there. And so I thought, okay, well, the best way for me to make sure that doesn't happen is to learn about our systems so that we can better figure out how to change it. And as soon as you start kind of peeling back the paper and the rug or lifting rocks and stuff, it is astonishing the things that I thought I knew about this country that just weren't reality. Because one of the things, and this is going to almost sound ridiculous, is there's a lot of Canadians that do not know there was slavery in Canada. But when you think about it, it's like, well, of course there was. Because all we're ever taught about is the Underground Railroad. And so, oh, people were escaping up to Canada for freedom and stuff because there was no slavery here. But they would always leave out the word anymore. And so there's no talk about the history. There's no talk about what happened. There's no talk about their descendants. No talk of reparations. There's no stories about what happened. It has been completely, I wouldn't say it's erased, but just so omitted to the point that most people aren't clued into that it happened here.
Well, if I could, like, they spend time, I'm assuming, well, like, this is a presumption, but it's kind of just logical. They're spending time talking about other things, and those other things are clearly not things that improve the tangible nature of what Canadians know about their country. I'll tell you this, the Californian kind of curriculum at the time for third and fourth graders at a certain point was to learn square dancing and line dancing during their history classes and during their social studies classes, which is
I got
different
square dancing
from learning about why, which is cool. Like that's fun. I mean, like do it in PE or whatever, but that was different than the amount of time we could have spent learning about why the missions in California that we all had like dioramas and projects of why those existed and what was there before those Catholic Spaniard missions oftentimes
Mm-hmm.
came to California. We spend time doing some things and not other things. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just like a logical existence that it's a, and I'll give you more time for this because you'll probably go into this, but it's like, it's a consistent nature, I think, in both countries where it's not just what you can compare between the two, like it's a TikTok kind of thing. What America does, so does Canada. But like it's the nature of power, regardless of where it is, to selectively choose what is important for the populace to understand, what they cling on to as history, so that for the rest of their lives, the ignorance just comes more easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Part of the research that I've done is I've looked back at we have these propaganda commercials called heritage moments, and they are so ridiculous. And I looked back at one about the Underground Railroad. My God, it's embarrassing. It is just so embarrassing. Trying to watch it now. And again, there's the subtle what is being omitted because in the commercial, with all the really horrendous stereotyped accents and everything, but it says between 1834 and 1863, thousands of people escaped to Canada to get away from slavery. But again, it's like, but you didn't really say what was happening before that 1834 mark. You forgot to mention that that's because we didn't have slavery anymore.
Polly ain't gonna make it. One of them slave catchers got him. Something must have happened. I just know it.
Liza, you both made it past the border yesterday. We've all done this before.
He's our Paul. He'll be here.
Come, let's pray.
No more praying.
Liza! Liza!
Between 1840 and 1860, more than 30,000 American slaves came secretly to Canada and freedom. They called it the Underground Railroad.
Lisa! We're free!
Yes, Polly's in Canada.
And I was reminded of the Heritage Moments commercial because one recently, I was surprised they're still making them, came out about insulin and about how it was Canada's great discovery. And it was through hard work and effort that we created this miracle drug that has saved millions of lives. And it's like, okay, but then you're also leaving out how the lab that made that was privatized and sold off. And that's why we aren't able to produce our own vaccine here, which is why so many Canadians were suffering during COVID because we don't have the means of production anymore. And when insulin was first discovered, they made the patent like $1 because they wanted it to go around the world. Whereas now we hear horror stories in the States of it costing thousands of dollars a month and people dying because they can't get it. In Canada, again, our prescriptions aren't free, but they are cheaper. But that said, there are still people in Canada who die every year because they can't get the prescriptions they need. And so to see these Heritage Moments commercials again, it drives me crazy because they are so propagandized. There's another one that I rewatched recently about how Canada got its name, and you see the white settlers coming in and they're trying to communicate with the indigenous peoples and they hear a word and they're like, huh, Canada. Huh, that's what this land is called. And then you have the comedic guy in the background saying, I think he means village. And it's just, you're looking at this and it's like I wish I could show you some of them now, but I don't know how to share screens yet. So. But it's crazy. And then I think back to what I learned in school. So I learned nothing of slavery, of Canadian slavery. I didn't learn anything about residential schools, or if it was taught so minorly that I don't recall it at all. And it wasn't until I was adult that I actually started to find out the horrors of what that was. And I'm sure you're aware of the major news that has happened in Canada recently about the discovery of the mass grave of children. And again, it's one of those things that when you start peeling back the layers, it's so beyond horrific. And again, many Canadians, they aren't educated into why certain language is being used, what happened, why it's so horrific. Like, for one thing, that school only had recorded about 51 deaths. And yet there's a grave of 215 children nearby. And so if you take that into account for over the 130 residential schools that were across this country, you can do the math there. And that's just of one grave at one school. There could be more graves at that school. But the government, the federal government, is refusing to look. Back in 2009, we have the Truth and Reconciliation Act, and a lot of Canadians, they will hear that and think, okay, we've done something, we're doing something. But all it was is a report, and of the 94 actions, only about 8 have been acted on since. And one of the things that they had requested back in 2009 was $1.5 million to search school grounds, and that was denied. And so many people are like, well, why doesn't the federal government do something and this and that? And I'm just like, I have been screaming this on Twitter, and I get far more responses to any other tweet except for pointing out this one very, very obvious point. The final years at the Kamloops school, the one that they just discovered the mass grave at, the prime minister of the country was Justin Trudeau's dad. Do you really think Justin Trudeau is eager to start an investigation when the federal government was involved? Like, the residential schools, that's all on the federal government. The churches were sometimes managing these schools, but it was the federal government. The RCMP, the people who would be doing the investigating, they were originally created to go and kidnap these children from the reservations that we forced them onto. And it was kidnapping. There was no way around it. Basically, they had code words they would use when they saw a white person approaching so that their kids would know to go run and hide in the bushes. And they would keep track of the children in a reservation, and if a parent was refusing to give up that child, then they would stop giving them food. And people are like, well, you know, they can still do this or they can still do that, but they weren't allowed off the grounds of the reservation without a pass. They needed a pass, and they had what they called an Indian agent in each of these reservations, and they needed permission from that person to even go off of that reservation to hunt. So it was very easy for them to starve them out or to starve them into submission. And again, people aren't aware that this happened in Canada, that it's still happening. The reservations are in horrendous condition. There's over, 30 to 40 that don't have clean drinking water and haven't had it for decades. The infrastructure is, the housing is full of mold. It's being broken down. There's no new housing. Their healthcare, again, they fall under federal jurisdiction, so they don't get the same healthcare I get. And people have died. Children have died too, because the province and the federal government were arguing over who would pay the medical bill. And that is the reality today. Today, in our prison system, 30% of all men, 40% of women are Indigenous peoples. They represent 5% of our population. Over half of the children in foster care are Indigenous. They represent only about 8% of children. So they keep on saying that this was a dark chapter in our history. No, it's still happening. It's not a chapter, it's the book. And it's still happening.
It's the present.
Mm-hmm. So that's why.
And so, like, there's.
And this is why.
No, I want you to. Yeah.
Yeah. This is why there's something that's also.
Sorry, there's so much lag with this thing.
No, I'll let you. You can have all the time you want after this. But there's another very important point that people aren't aware of. The Canadian government is fine calling it a cultural genocide. And there's a very specific reason why the Canadian government does that. That is not recognized under the UN Convention. If we referred to it as a regular genocide, then the ICC, the International Criminal Court, can actually step in and start doing investigations, taking people to court, things of that sort. But so long as we refer to it as a cultural genocide, that won't happen. Whereas, in fact, this is a genocide. There's no, it's not, yeah, it's just a flat out genocide to every measure of what it is. But you were going to say?
No, yeah. As sorry about it, there's like Zoom delays, so
Yeah.
that always makes it fun. But like, I think when drawing parallels, I want to be careful in this conversation because the ways of creating these parallels are only as a method by which you can quickly teach people who don't understand a thing to help them to get closer to understanding something else that's new information, right? So these parallels are limited because like Canada's situation is its own situation, its political context are its own political context. But um, that being said, if there are almost 200 different countries in the world, there aren't 200 or like times the political parties, 400, 800, whatever permutation of that number. There aren't so many different ways to do oppression or any of these things. There's a couple of effective ways. And so because of that, the parallels you can draw are similar. And yeah, that's just it I mean, like the parallels with you can go in so many different directions, just with the treatment of indigenous people in the United States as well, with not even like the second tier like system, but like the third tier system of like reservations and how little consideration is given to them because of like how honestly our system is funded or yeah, works based off of money and donations. The more money and donations you give, the more influence you have for the politicians. And so the poorest people, the ones who don't have a voice, who can barely even get political representation, which doesn't come free, even if you're just running, you need money to make flyers even. People are just getting left behind. And instead of and I think this is where I would draw the conversation out of this to the parallels that I think are the most important to the left right now as far as moving forward. How do we start to go on the offense and start to win some of this power back for people? And what I think needs to be addressed is this sort of what Canada is at a state of right now and what America is slowly going into, which is the sort of, I'll call it the malaise of the white professional middle class, where like during the Trump administration in America, all of a sudden, people who were going into offices and workspaces at regular bland sort of companies, right? They were all of a sudden very informed about the Muslim ban, and they were like going to airports and figuring out ways to donate. And they went to the Women's March, they went to Black Lives Matter marches, and they did more protests than they knew they could about. And they formed all these different groups, and podcasts were made. And there's this whole now cottage industry where books are sold and marketed, and there are folks of color who go on to these platforms to essentially sell their books and market their things and their ideas, some of them with better faith and intentions than others. But it is a cottage industry that's meant to serve as an umbrella or a cushion or a comfort to the white professional middle class that is, wants to feel that they are moving forward from the tension of their past, but they don't want to reckon with it too much because we ultimately want to avoid guilt. We ultimately want to avoid actual feeling like there's something in the present that has to be done relating to these issues, because the idea of, I mean, I don't experience this, but apparently white people really fear being called racist and having that like point like put onto them. At least in America, that's what's constantly said on the right and sometimes on the left. So like you throw this idea out very sparingly. But at the same time, you have to get this white professional middle class to, on the one hand, hold the 1619 project and redlining the process in America wherein Black people weren't allowed to build home ownership and equity and like generational wealth for people, right? Like you talk about all those different aspects of policy that this group of people really loves and appreciates and really enjoys. But you have to also convince them that no, but these things are fixed now, and there's nothing you are personally guilty of right now, because the worst thing we can do is make people who we rely on for power and to sustain that power to feel like we're threatening them, we're assaulting them in any way. So this fragility, if you will, starts to take precedent over the problem at hand, which is a lack of reckoning with history and a whitewashing, maple washing, eagle washing, flag washing, whatever you want to call it, of the present, and how the past and the present are connected. And until we reconcile with that in the present, the future is just going to continue to be a repeat of some of these worst things. Not just a repeat, but these problems will snowball into things that ultimately might be kind of decent for building like class solidarity movements and over toppling the whole system. But a lot of suffering will come from that as a result of all that snowballing. And I think, as you were alluding to even earlier in this conversation, that tends to come with like a right-wing nationalist tinge that always tries to find its way into power as a result. So I think there are better ways to go down these avenues, but I think the thing that is standing in our way right now is the power of these elites, these Justin Trudeaus who can paint this picture of things being really nice, and like do this for this pseudo woke elite class, but then allow that elite class to still live in the bubble of their ancestors, of still being treated as exceptional and like the best and as the top tier citizens, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are engaged, more likely to vote, more likely to give their dollars to that political system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that's been happening over here recently that's kind of shining a light on this sort of aspect is we see what's happening over at Israel and Palestine, and finally a lot of people in Canada are starting to wake up to the oppression of what's been happening in the Gaza Strip and what's been happening to Palestinians. And because again, all the same issues, Canada sells weapons to Israel, Canada supports Israel the same way your government does. And reporters who would want to talk about it would get suppressed and all that sort of stuff. But because of what's happened recently, more people have been talking about it. And what's really kind of telling is the white Canadians that are be like, that's horrible, what's happening over there, and look at all the land that they're stealing and this, and then it's like, you do know what's happening here. Oh, well, no, it's different.
This you?
Yeah, it's like, that's different. Yeah. They don't see it. That is like, no, we don't drop bombs on them, but we do everything else. And in some aspects, we have dropped viral bombs on them, because it was quite common to purposely give them disease that they knew they couldn't overcome well. And since they were usually starved, their immune systems were also compromised to begin with. And it's like, we've done everything to try to, as the founding fathers would say, get rid of the Indian problem. And still, so many Canadians can say, well, it's happening over there and it's bad, but that's not the same as what's happening here. And I guess, like, I don't want to be like, oh, I'm different or anything, but I've never lived with wealth. I live in dire poverty now because I'm on disability for mental health reasons. And I guess because of the way that I've seen the world, I'm aware I have participated in the settler culture. I have benefited from it. I don't, like, personally, if somebody were to say that you're a settler or you're a racist or anything of that sort, I don't take it to heart because I know there's truth to it. I know that's part of the reason why I'm alive today is because I'm a white woman. Because to me, I can relate that to mental health. That is the one place where white women have one of the most highest privileges, is being taken seriously when you say, I want to harm myself. And so I've been able to get treatment, medication, therapy. If I go to the emergency room and say, I feel like harming myself, I'm taken seriously 75% of the time. which is drastically far more than any other group of people. And because of that, I'm alive today. And so I'm aware of my privilege there. And I know that I have it in other places that I simply don't see because I haven't been exposed to it. And because of my background with mental health and the things that I've gone through as someone who presents as female, because we have all the patriarchy and sexism and misogyny here, I used to always be told that my experience didn't happen or what happened to me wasn't real. So when I start hearing the stories, I never not believed people. I just never heard them before because the government did such a good job of keeping that separated and out of the mainstream. Because some of the stories that are coming out right now about what's happened at these residential schools are just, you want to not believe them. They're so bad. They're so horrific. And I can understand a lot of the people who live in their bubble, the white collar workers. Like, this is where I actually think a more socialized system would come handy, is they know that they're hanging on by a thread as well in this current economy. And they don't want to disrupt it. They don't want to give up what they have. And they don't want to risk having to pay reparations or anything of this sort to disrupt this tiny little balance that they have. Whereas if we had a more socialized system, you wouldn't have to worry about losing everything because you would always have enough to get by. And I think we live in a world right now where that is not the case. There are so many people, again, in Canada, it's $400 away from being on the streets. And so they're so focused on keeping themselves alive that it's hard for them to get involved. It's hard for them to focus. Whereas I think during COVID, again, especially when some people did get payments and get some sort of stability, they actually had the time and mental ability to start saying, hey, that over there, that's not right. What can I do?
And I think to that point, which is important here, because this is a distinction that I'm constantly making, and my co-hosts on Power Report at youtube.com/Dan from the internet are constantly making, is that when it comes to like people's economic conditions and their abilities and their material resources, when people are in poverty and they're in conditions where, like, America has that similar statistic of a lot of people, at least before COVID, were $400 away from an emergency or couldn't save $400 for an emergency, and so they were that close to being in some really dire financial situation. That is a moment of potential class solidarity, and it's like tension, where if you can relieve some of that tension for people, it's just naturally, it's an anxiety, one of many anxieties that a lot of people carry, some of us more than others, with like mental health sort of like battles that we have. But it's something that can be taken off of the plate of people so they can focus more on conditions that are less material but still important, social conditions, mores, things like that. That is not to say, however, that a socialized system on its own would repair racial issues. It would make it harder for you to use economic tension and weaponize that and say the economic tension you're feeling is because we're giving too much money to the blanks, to this group, that group. We're spending too much money on this dumb thing that educates this minority group, that's this like liberal like hobby horse agenda, as opposed to giving you money. It's harder to weaponize that scarcity and have people more internally think for themselves and more like on a survival mindset if they are not wanting for things, if they have the things they need. So that's definitely a point there, but it's important to deconstruct those things. Like I said, we do that all the time because a lot of times on the left, getting on that broadening your mindset sort of tone, that's like the theme of this conversation broadly, is that there is an assumption on the left that class will just solve everything. Like you just get things through a class perspective and you do all these things. And it's like, it's a yes and thing with social issues and race. And a lot of people who are on the left and think of things as class first, they tend to be of a certain complexion. They've seen racial issues and social justice issues as oh, I don't want the cancel culture police to have to deal with me. I don't want to deal with that. They're stop their prevention. When no, um, these are communities that have been making up the left organization wise for a while, all right, for a long time, longer than a lot of these people have been coming in, right? And so a lot of the people on the social justice side, whether it's LGBTQ issues, whether it's racial justice issues, whether it's mental health or disability issues, any of these other like marginalized groups that are often seen as afterthoughts in modern societies, Canada, United States, Western societies, Eastern societies, etc. Um, they've been holding it down movement wise. And so it's good. And I think there's a lot of education to be done for folks on that side of the movement to be able to see things from a class context. And I think they'll be able to be fresh to those ideas because, again, they've been in the movement for a minute. It's not like a tough sell to them. You'll be preaching to the choir. But this sort of moving to the side or, oh, yeah, I understand the racial thing. Let's be good. It's all good. It gets to this we know better than them mentality, which is straight from the colonial mindset. It's straight from the we have a better religion for them, we have a better way of life for them. So it's okay if we push them to the side, whether it's in a political movement as we in America get closer to when DSA meets again. So like that's a fun time. Whether it's like a political movement and you're like pushing them aside so they don't have representation, or whether you have power and pushing people aside has genocidal ramifications, right? It's always this belief that we know better because we have this way of thinking that you don't understand it. We're not going to explain it to you, but trust us, it's applicable and you'll be fine. We haven't been fine in that. And like we speaking as people from like those marginalized communities haven't been fine with that for hundreds of years. And in order for these coalitions to be built and for them to stay strong and lasting and even get to the point of strength that is required to have any sort of international solidarity, which is needed to have these broader social economic changes that we want. We're going to have to get smart, real smart on how the intersections of race and class really they have to be fused together. You can't talk about one without the other because you're not safe just thinking in a like one track mindset of either one, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's people want an easy solution to this. They want to think if I just check this box, if I just donate money here, the problem's solved. I feel better about myself and I can move on. But the problems are so complex, so nuanced, so part of our history and our mind frame. It's going to take a lot of work. And it's one of those things like, yeah, I wish I could just, there, it's done. But even here, fighting people about trying to see that people on disability deserve enough money so we aren't starving, that's hard because they're still just looking at us like, it's getting given to you. You're doing it for free. Why don't you get a job? And it's like, first of all, if you're on disability because you can't work, it's because you can't work. And yeah, I wish that there was more that could be done, but it's a matter of getting the message out there. It's a matter of listening to people. And it's so complex. And there's issues that I'm not even aware of yet that need to be dealt with before we can really start seeing a change. And as we start making these changes, other issues are going to come up and it's going to be a constant battle. But hopefully with the internet, I think a lot of these stories are getting out. Like, I know a lot of people say what you will about Twitter, but I have learned so much about what's going on because of Twitter that I would have never known otherwise. And
Yeah,
I've been making videos about it. So,
it's Twitter is I'll say this about Twitter. It is where a lot of the political people are. So if you want to get messages out, it makes sense for you to be there. You just understand all that the platform is and factor that into your own personal health.
yeah, no, I've recently started to get nasty tweets about some of my videos, and I'm like, I'm going places.
That's when you know you've made it.
I know.
Yeah, that's when you know you've made it, honestly. Yeah.
I know.
That's the rite of passage.
I'm looking at it, it's like, you've got 15 followers and you've been on since 2008. I'm not worried. I'm not worried about Or some people, I love the men are coming out of the woodwork now telling me how to run my channel. And there's this one feedback that I get that goes along the lines of, if you just make your channel better, it would be better, is what the feedback actually translates to. And it's like, okay, got it. Good to know. Good to know. I will do that vague thing.
Yeah, everyone is like an armchair YouTube channel operator when they're firing off in the comments. But it's okay, free engagement, all good. Keep it
Yeah,
going.
no, I don't mind. Or like I recently updated my logo. Like first I asked for help because I was a bit nervous as to what I could do. I'm very good in Photoshop, but designing a logo is a very specific type of art that I'm not necessarily good at. So I asked for help, and of course the only people to contact me were ones that didn't read the message where it says it's unpaid. And so they were very disappointed when I reminded them this is unpaid, and they're like, never mind. And so I didn't get any help, so I just did it myself. And then, of course, once I've done it, I'm like, look at my new logo. People are like, well, you know what you should have done. It's like, yeah, no, it's nice for you to tell me now.
Yeah.
Anyway, I had a little thing that could be a little bit of fun to do where we compare heads of states. So we have a premier in Ontario who is the worrisome figure that I was worried about when Trump got into power that we would be seeing soon. And lo and behold, here he is, Doug Ford. There's something about privileged white men who talk about themselves in the third person that should be an alarm bell. I don't know why they do that. It doesn't make any sense to me, but Doug Ford has all the same tics as Donald Trump does when it comes to suddenly start talking about himself in the third person, or no one has treated the indigenous peoples better than me. No one has been better to the black community than me. I mean, well, God. He came from a place of privilege. His family owned like a labeling company, so he had millions of dollars. His family had been in politics, and yet he still tries to pass himself off as the average guy. And it's ridiculous. And so I have a couple of kind of like, what is something that your governor has done that is just kind of, you know what, that was shitty. Then something that was kind of wrong, bad, horrific, and then just the dumbest thing you can think of that they did. And we can kind of maybe compare notes here.
Yeah, so Governor Gavin Newsom of California, the great golden state of California, while he was running for mayor of San Francisco, one of the larger cities in the state, slept with his best friend's wife, his campaign manager's wife, actually, during the election, caused them to divorce. That's why I always like to intro. Anytime I'm talking about Gavin Newsom, that's the first thing I point to. Not because it's like relevant to politics, not because like, hey, like people's sex lives and personal lives, like you do whatever. I'm not one to judge that much. That's kind of a shitty thing to do to your best friend. You won't find me doing that in that way. But like, that's kind of a character sort of judgment thing. And this is from 2006, 7, 8, like early, like mid, like late 2000s, but before 2010, like way before 2010. It's a character judgment on Gavin Newsom. If you want to get to something more substantive, so there's this whole thing, and I talked about this in a recent Power Report episode that folks can check out, but there's this whole thing about a recall that Gavin Newsom is seeing. And California, every state, as Canadians may or may not know, has their own rules that sometimes supersede federal America laws, and sometimes they're just like, they don't. But most states get to run their elections whatever way they want to. So you have 50 plus different ways of running elections. California's way with governors involves you get a number of signatures on a recall petition. Those signatures get verified and you can recall the governor pretty much at a whim. It's almost like snap elections in some parliamentary systems, but it's very people powered. It's logistically very difficult because you have to gather a lot of signatures. But Gavin and Republicans have done recall efforts before. Famously, the reason why California had movie star Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger was because of a Republican-led recall against a Democratic governor at the time. And that recall and the Republicans going like, oh, let's put the celebrity here and see what happens, basically led to us having a movie star governor for a little while. But like this recall effort is something that's used as a political tool very often by Republicans. Basically, the minute a Democrat gets elected, they start the recall effort, whether it happens or whether it doesn't. It's just like something they can try because it's a method of like political as a tool you can use. But basically, Gavin Newsom ran as a, I was mayor of San Francisco. I did all these different things with the LGBTQ plus community. I'm very involved in climate justice and all these different issues. Listen, I'm progressive through and through. I'm going to be a model for what California can be. California likes to posture itself in some ways I think are justified, in some ways aren't, as being like America plus, like one step a little bit above and better than the country as a whole. In some ways that I, as a native Californian, can get down with, in some ways I think are just pompous and idiotic. But he really ran as that, like, I am going to be like the progressive version of the future. And then as Trump kind of came to power, it's like, I'm going to be the progressive alternative. So that is to say, from a policy perspective, the thing that he's done that's most annoyed me is you can see within a year the flip-flop of, while Newsom was handling COVID-19, and there's a whole thing about the governors doing a bad job of handling COVID-19, especially in the state of New York. But in California, Newsom was facing a lot of fire for what were seen as like, or presumed as like, draconian lockdown policies that Newsom wasn't even following himself. So like that sort of became like an issue in the discourse for a little bit of time. But all behind the scenes, while there was this whole hullabaloo over masks, not mask virus, what do we do? Newsom was behind the scenes signing off on a bunch of new fracking permits, of allowing the ability for California, the limited amount of like natural beauty it's still got left because it's constantly being burned or eroded into the ground or earthquaked or just other natural or man-made issues going on, that we would allow hydraulic fracking to happen in different states at a record pace, like the Associated Press, a couple of other like leftist alternative outlets online reporting about this. But at a certain point, I think the number was 25 or more different permits that Newsom signed in order to like have more fracking done in the United States. I mean, in California specifically, to deepen our reliance on fossil fuels at a time when we should be moving more towards renewables. That recall I talk about comes around, and all of a sudden Gavin Newsom has to try to prove his progressive bona fides to get liberals and progressives to support him against this Republican-led recall effort, where he's fear-mongering about the idea of Caitlyn Jenner possibly running to become the new governor of California. Whether that's true or not, that's up to time to predict. But now he's saying that, okay, we're going to get rid of all new fracking starting in 2025, with some exceptions. So it's like he runs as the idea of the future of America, and he is, in actuality, the most cynical version of that. Where it's the same, I'm going to put a nice, polite face, friendly face, smiles. We love Happy Pride Month, all these good like face on the same neoliberal, environmental wrecking. I didn't even get into policing policies and all those other things, but it's business as usual, status quo. And so that, in my long-winded answer, is just like some issues with Gavin Newsom.
Well, actually, that reminds me of the green belt here in Ontario. It's the largest green belt in the world, and Doug Ford has been trying to sell off chunks of that to real estate realtors to develop the land and stuff. And it's like, you don't know how much we need this. We need the green belt. It is the farmland on there, the amount of oxygen it produces, the way it cleans, the water it cleans, the water we get. Like, you can't destroy the green belt, and he's been selling that off, and that's just been, again, it's very quiet. A lot of people don't know about a lot of the bad things Doug Ford is doing because the media doesn't like to report news, I guess. But
They only have 24 hours. Not like they have, it's not like they're running out of time to talk about these things.
I know, like, that's a whole other issue with the media in general that I'm also trying to tackle with my channel, just how little media we actually have and how they're all owned by the same people, and they tell us what the government wants us to know versus the things that we need to know. But like, one of the just crappiest things that Doug Ford did during the pandemic. Like, there's lots of bad and horrible things he did, but this one was just kind of like, that's low. So in Canada, you probably heard that we got $2,000 a month for the pandemic. That's not true for many different reasons, but also people on disability got nothing. And depending on which province you live in, you got about half of that. And so then it was up to the provincial powers to top that up. And in Ontario, maybe if you had a good caseworker, you got an extra $100 3 times. And that's it. Doug Ford made it so that horses got $2,500 a month. Horses, they got more than like double of what we get, but they're a horse. That was yeah. Then he also
Kind of tells you a lot about what you are viewed, like how the government sees you.
yeah. Also, when he first got into power, he canceled something that the Liberal government had put into place, which was a basic income pilot program that was supposed to run for 3 years, and it had only been on for about a year, and he just outright canceled it. So people who were relying on it to go back to school, to start their business, to live in a better place, all of a sudden that rug was just pulled out from under them with no warning, just completely gone. And then, the potential study that would have resulted from that to show how well this worked, that's all gone. So he actually spent money to destroy that program because it ended up costing a lot. But then again, just the way the government, they get away with so much. Apparently in Ontario during COVID, $4.4 billion went missing of pandemic relief, and that is not getting talked about at all. It's unaccounted for, as they say. So it was supposed to go to certain programs. Maybe the program got it, maybe they didn't. And it's just the thought of that money alone could have pulled everyone on disability or living off of Ontario Works, EI, and stuff like that out of poverty. Like, just the amount of good that would have done, and it's just gone, and nobody's saying boo about it. I don't know how that's allowed to happen, but apparently it has. And the absolute most horrific thing is what happened with the long-term care homes here in Ontario, because again, something Canadians are not paying attention to is how much our systems are getting privatized. Like our healthcare system, it's being chipped away at constantly, but a lot of our long-term care homes used to be nationalized or part of the public domain, and they've become privatized. So back during the beginning of this pandemic, it was so bad in the long-term care homes, they had to call in the military for help. And when the military arrived, they found 26 people had died of dehydration. So just the quality of care people were getting. Some of the service members were traumatized. They have PTSD from what they found in these homes. That's how bad it was. And the Ford government has done very, very little to fix that problem. Instead, they've given about $170 million to the shareholders of these homes. They gave them money. One of the shareholders is a man named Mike Harris. He used to be Premier of Ontario. And that's when a lot of the cuts to these long-term care homes started. He was given this year the Order of Ontario from Premier Doug Ford, because they're all helping each other out. It's all, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. They're all part of this elite group. I am sure some of that $4.4 billion went to some of these people. No doubt about it, but I've only been able to find one article covering what should be a very important news story. But one thing that will just always make me smile because of how utterly, completely dumb and stupid it was, is he was all about rebranding Ontario. It's a place for business to grow. And part of that was he wanted a new license plate for Ontarians. So he designed one that you cannot see in the dark.
That rocks.
the way the lights hit it and stuff, it washes out the print completely, so you can't see the license plates in the dark. And just the thought of like how upset he was that his little pet project was, it's kind of like when Donald Trump was showing the picture, look at the colors I picked for this plane. That's kind of what Doug Ford was doing with these license plates. Just to have it go so, you can't see them when it's, past about 5 p.m. in the winter in my part of Ontario.
Oh man.
And so
Those big, beautiful license plates.
and so they're redesigning them again. And there's an article out. And when they released the new print idea to the media, they also somehow attached the original pencil sketch of it. And so you just see this scribbling image beside it, and it's like, could you have at least not used paint to have done this mock-up?
And that's the other thing is I think there's a lot of issues, there's a lot of barriers to getting into politics. And one of them is the fact that there's so many distractions that are put in the media. And so the media is definitely paying a lot of attention to those goofs and those gaffes because they're funny, and there's like economic logistics to doing those articles over other ones. But like you were saying, the real like meat and potatoes, like the Ontario Greenbelt you were mentioning, privatization of healthcare system, those are what we really actually need a robust media to do. But in the reality is that media is in on the game. This is self-dealing for the elites. The politicians basically allow I guess keep the pipes going. They like grease the wheels so the corruption can keep going both ways. The titans of industry basically get their money and it goes in a revolving door. And the media sort of does this bread and circuses sort of reaction thing where here's some things to get angry about, here's some things to be happy about. None of them are the real things. And so it's important what definitely like you're doing and other like leftists are doing as they're building like a burgeoning media in Canada. I know there are a lot of other folks in Canada who are doing that as well. There's like Rod Rousseau, I know there's a couple of other blogs out there on the left that are trying to really develop this space for the left in Canada to really like kind of build power and not only be able to have a media counter narrative to go against like the prevailing mainstream media that's in Canada, but also to act as a political force and as a catalyst for political activity that can engage viewers not just in liking and commenting on videos and donating to Patreons, but in addition to those things, getting out on the streets and actually finding ways to organize and collaborate with people and support and build power to go against this entrenched establishment power and build grassroots power to people power and numbers to actually go against that. That's something that's currently trying to happen in the United States. And because the United States is a country of we are number one rah-rah individualism, even on the left, you're getting different permutations and weird versions of that. And I'll leave that comment there. But ultimately, it's important what you're doing and what we're doing here, and to start to changing that narrative and starting to say, hey, there are actually people on watch for this corruption. We are making the connections here that people inherently know, but because no one talks about it and they haven't seen people talk about it, they go into this sort of Stockholm syndrome state. The public does, and they just go, okay, I guess this is just how it is. We just have to accept it because nothing's changing. But to show people that there's people who actually see reality and can say the sky is blue, the trees are green. Once that's a group that people can see a community in and can build power in, that's where I think is where I can extract a little bit of optimism from some of these conversations as far as what can come from the future, what the left can do. Because that's what I would just always hate from a media perspective, is feeling like I'm making these videos or producing these videos, but like, then what? What do people do? What can people feel like they can actually do to turn the tide? And like, the truth is no one individual person can, but a number of individual people making smart decisions in unison in solidarity with each other can do a hell of a lot more than you'd expect, just because so few people are paying attention that a few motivated smart actors can really make a shift that then signals to other people, hey, there's something going on, and the people power can follow. But it's just those catalysts, those little steps, what dominoes fall into place on the good side for once.
Well, I know you've definitely made an impact. You've helped inspire me to get talking and stuff, and I love watching your videos. I love hearing your take. You make a difference. Like you really do. And it's so hard to tell from this side of the camera the type of impact that you can have to somebody in a different country on the other side of the continent. But it's there, and at some point there's going to be a critical mass of people getting together. And there's a course that I took actually about some of the issues with Indigenous peoples, and it was called The Road to Reconciliation Must Begin with the Truth. And I think part of our primary job right now is just getting people aware of what the problem is, because it's so hard to deal with the problem when you don't know the extent of it. You don't know how bad it is. So just letting people know these are the issues we're up against. Now we need to make a plan, because I do believe more people are better than not. And so if people knew, let's say, about how bad the housing crisis was here in Canada, how much rent has exploded, how much people on disability actually receive, I think more people would care, but that information just can't get out there. And it's the same, more people have become open and aware and compassionate to Indigenous peoples because they've started to actually hear the stories. They've started to hear the truth. And once more people do that, I think we can start working towards, okay, so now what? And yeah, just trying to rely on mainstream media right now, it's not good. One, if you want to keep up to date with Canadian politics that just recently came to be, was The Breach. And Nomi Klein helped fund that, or helped found it. But there's other little podcasts, Left Turn, that's out every week as well, that talk about Canadian politics, and it helps just to get people aware and knowing. I try my best with my tiny little channel to get things out there, and I have some people who like to follow me. I like to refer to them as boxers, because why not? But it's so amazing to think that, you know, this technology, which has also caused a lot of strife, it allows me to connect with somebody like you, and it allows somebody like you to influence so many more people. And again, it's hard for you to know how much of a difference you've already made. And I have no doubt that that's just going to grow and continue as you continue with your channel.
Yeah, I want to appreciate you for saying that. I play around with the persona online of like, am I really self-aware? Am I not? But like, I truthfully, I don't not yet feel the thing that I've seen other colleagues and people around me when they feel like they know they like have an impact, they make a difference, and they sort of like navigate around that and wield that power around in like a room in a situation. I don't feel that totally, but like as a person, as I wake up, but like, you know, more and more people like take me aside moments like this, like, no, like what you're doing is like really great and like helpful and like inspires me and other people, and I really appreciate it. And like that's like meaningful. It keeps me going. I really, so like I can't think of what or how, but like anything that I have done to do to inspire yourself and others, I'm happy that literally just makes it all worth it. So yeah, just thank you, and thank you for doing what you're doing and taking whatever like inspiration that was into like channeling it into something really cool for your own, to help address, like what you said, that lack of information, spreading it to other people, so other people can then be empowered by that information and be inspired by you. So it's a good virtuous cycle that I'd like to see a lot more of on the left, and I think it's there. It's just supporting each other like we're doing like this. So it's
Yeah.
all good.
Well, I'm hoping to get my little tiny channel up and going, but like you, I see a lot of other people who are just starting and they have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 subscribers to their channel, and they're like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not there yet, but hopefully someday I'll get there, and then I'll just be a tiny channel instead of a tiny channel.
Yeah, and always focus on the quality. I think a lot of YouTubers have said a version of this, and it's right. Focus on the quality, do what you like, the views will come. They come at different times, but make what you're happy watching and what you feel makes an impact and makes a difference. And sometimes production headaches come with that. Like I'm in the middle of a rut on like 2 videos that I'm working on right now, and it's kind of frustrating, but like it's because I will only make what I want, and I care about that more than views, because I'm happy with the videos that I have that I made in that way that are still up right now that stand the test of time. And that's like what I thought of that's really important to me. And that's just, I guess, would be my advice, is just keep at it, keep doing what you're doing. People will are loving what you're doing, and will continue to support you through it, and they'll be very patient through it. So if you give that up, they'll also know, and then and then they'll leave, and they'll respond to that as well. They'll be very vocal. So keep doing you, and then all the good virtuous things will come from that.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you. I'm kind of fanning out here. I'm like, I don't know, what's the gender neutral term of a fangirl or a fanboy?
Yeah, that's what fan person. I mean, like I'm still hung up on the idea of like anyone being a fan of me is just like a wild philosophy. But
You have
no,
no
I
idea. I've told
absolutely
other
flattered.
people and they're like jealous of me because I've done this. So you
Can these people please start talking to me? My ego needs it. I'm Twitter at Dan from the web. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
you have a following here in Ontario, Canada, at least that I know of. Hey, if you ever
Lovely.
want to come here, you have
I know.
fans.
I've been telling a lot. I've been telling a lot of people that I'm overdue for another Canada stay. So absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you. Salut, à la prochaine. Thank you for watching and stay tuned. I'm Sandy, wishing your tomorrow is better than your today.